Welcome back to FXRS episode, I don't even remember anymore. I guess probably 6 or 7. Yeah, a lot has happened since the last video. We're going to get into it here and I'll show you some close-ups of the bike. I think in the last video I got as far as getting the cam chest done, and I was talking about how I was going to do some work on actually getting the jugs and pistons and everything on. Didn't record any of that, as usual. I'm very sorry, but I did get that work done, so I'll go into some details here in just a moment and show you where the bike is at this time. So, lots been going on. Been a blast, so here we go. Alright, so here we are. The bike is back together, as you can see. Yeah, I guess we'll get right into it. So, where I left the last video, the pistons and jugs and heads and rocker boxes and everything were completely off. It was still torn down. I think I had just finished the cam chest and everything involved in that. So here's where we're at. Now again, I'm sorry I didn't record. I had someone come and help me. It was actually my father-in-law. I didn't want to have to worry about dealing with the camera. I was just working on the bike. So we successfully put the jugs on and pistons. That's why I needed help. That's definitely a two-person job, especially because I already had the pistons inside the cylinders. I had to have someone hold the jugs while I put the wrist pins in the pistons and put the spiral locks on, which spiral locks they're nice, but they're really, really difficult to get on. So we did that, and we got the heads on, got them torqued down, obviously new head gaskets, new base gaskets, and started putting the rocker boxes on. That's kind of where we ran into our first issue. And of course, I'm getting text messages as soon as I try to make a video. Why does this happen? I guess I need to put my phone in like airplane mode or something. So anyway, we got the back rocker box on because that's the most difficult one, as it requires very close spaces. I already had the front engine mount off, and it was propped up on those little pieces of wood, you might recall. But even with that, there was not enough space to get the rocker boxes actually on and screwed in and attached. So had to lower the engine down more. And that's kind of where the trouble began. See, I tried putting the back rocker box on, and it didn't work at first. I needed more space. I took it out. And as part of that, I kind of mixed up the bolts. And in normal Harley fashion, there's 15 different size bolts, not literally, obviously, but there's a number of different size bolts. I think it's 3 different ones, 3 or 4 in that rocker box. And the main 2 bolts that actually keep the rocker boxes down to the heads, there's 2 on this side, 2 on the other side. They look identical unless you stick them right up next to each other, and there's a very small difference in length. I don't know if it's an 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, it's not much. Well, either way, we got the rocker boxes totally down, and the back ones would not torque all the way down to the rocker box. Come to find out, they were too long. The long ones need to go on this side. So we had to take all of that back off, which, again, you're working in a tight space here, it's kind of difficult. So we did that, flipped the bolts around, and everything went fine. We got the rocker boxes on, the mid part of the rocker box, the top cover, all the gaskets. As you can see, it still have a little bit of I don't know if you can tell, there's a little bit of an oil seep. So the James gasket kit comes with the like fiber washers, and you can see that fiber washer just immediately broke. So that's leaking. I'm probably going to replace all of these rocker cover washers with the metal and rubber ones. Actually a little pricey, so I gotta look around and see where I can find a good deal on those. But it's not a big deal. It's literally like a drip every once in a while and just comes back. I can live with that for now. Of course, it drips all over everything, which sinks, but... So, still got a little bit of a leak there, but continuing on. Then we did the front jug, piston, head, rocker boxes, and of course, along with that came the push rod tubes, and new push rod seals. And that's about as far as we got with, or as far as I got with the help. The next day, I came back out and I started working on the intake. So, as part of putting the heads on, we did install the intake inside. It's going to be really hard to see that because it's shoved down in there. So, there's a YouTube channel called Tetro Machine, I think. It's a curmudgeon Harley tech machinist who works on these, and he has really informative videos, though they're extremely long. And what I saw him do when he put together actually an FXR was he used the air intake manifold as kind of a way to align the heads, because there is some wiggle in there even though there's dowel pins and stuff. So when we were putting the heads on, we actually put the air intake manifold in with the seals and everything, of course, to kind of align the heads, and we used that as part of the process when we torqued it down. So what I had to do the next day was just get my new carburetor on. So I installed the carburetor, that bolted up perfectly, being that it's a CD clone. I already put some of the hop-up things in the carburetor, like thumb screw on the bottom for the idle mixture, and the thumb screw for the idle adjustment, actually. So that all went on really well. I did have to make my throttle cables, which I already knew I was going to do. So I got a universal throttle cable kit, actually off of Amazon. It was only like 45 bucks. And yeah, it was super easy. And as you can see, and again, focus problems always, because it doesn't want to focus on the brake lines, of course. There we go. As you can see, they look perfect. I mean, they look factory. There's really nothing to complain about. They went on well, and I was able to take a lot of slack out. The cables that were on this, obviously with ape hangers, were too long, but they were even too long for the ape hangers. I don't know where all that slack went, but I mean, it was like a foot too long. So I got this on, and I tucked it together with the clutch cable real nice, and then the front brake line kind of meets down here. So they're all kind of following the same pattern. Obviously, the brake line's a little off to the side because it's got to go to the perch there, but I think this looks really good compared to all that junk, that silver junk that was on there and how long it was. So obviously I did the front brake line too and put new fittings on and whatnot. So got my carburetor or my throttle lines all on. Because you make them yourself, you do have to use like little screw ends for the part that goes to the carburetor, where you run the line through and you just kind of screw it down. I did screw it down and then try to flow some solder into it. It didn't really work too well to flow the solder in it. It was just kind of clumping up on the outside, even with lots of flux. But I think it helped, and at least it got into where the screw is, so the screw shouldn't back out or anything like that. So I feel like it's going to hold. I don't think it's going to be a problem. Yeah, only time will tell, but the cables look great, and I got them routed real nice here, you know, behind the side of the tank right there, and they run along the backbone, and everything's gorgeous. So, and they feel great too. I mean, everything just works perfectly. So, and then I got my high flow air cleaner on here. This is a general, I think it was made by V-Twin, but it's like a Screaming Eagle type of air cleaner. It's this normal thing that goes on any Harley where, you know, the round filter, kind of the K&N style filter goes in it. The only thing I had to do is it's not meant for this early style Evo, it's meant for top breather, and my engine's a bottom breather. So what that means is the holes in the heads are smaller because there's no air going through them. They're just there really for mounting points. So what I had to do is get some smaller bolts. The ones that came with this wouldn't work. I had to get some smaller bolts to actually attach this into the head, and then some real big thick washers on the front and back to kind of give the bolts some substance to push up against. But they don't really serve any purpose other than just to hold the air cleaner to the bike, and it's, you know, perfectly set. So everything lined up perfectly using my the air intake that was for a Sportster, or I should say the air intake manifold that was for a Sportster. As you recall in a previous video, I plugged up the Vos port. That fit perfectly. My Chinese CV carburetor fit perfectly. I jetted it according to the Andrews suggestions for using that Andrews cam along with some higher compression pistons. I ran my choke cable here. I already had this bracket from a prior build. So instead of running it to the other side of the bike, I run it here on top of the air cleaner. I like that. It's nice and clean. That worked great. And as you can see, my OEM OEM air filter cover fit perfectly on that air cleaner as well. So it's real stealthy. It looks just like the original, but it's actually a high flow air cleaner behind there. What else? Obviously, I hooked up all the mounts. I hooked up the front motor mount. I hooked up the voltage regulator. Tried to tuck all my cables real nicely. Oh, okay. Well, I'll get to that in a second. Sorry, I'm trying to think of everything I did. This was like a week ago already, so it's a lot to remember. I put all my ignition and the top motor mount that's on this side back on. Everything went on without issue, really. Putting it back together was pretty easy. I didn't really run into any problems. So, not necessarily a problem, but one thing that did take some time, and I kind of knew this was going to be the case, was obviously I have an aftermarket exhaust on here, and as I said in previous videos, this is not even meant for an Evo, let alone an Evo FXR. This is a later model Dyna exhaust. It would be for like a 96-inch Dyna. As I suspected, and as the internet told me, the ports on the heads line up perfectly with it. So Evo and twin cam exhaust ports are the same. I had no issues there. So I was able to recycle my flanges. Everything went on just fine. It fits pretty well. It's not tucked in super close to the engine, which is okay. I don't think it looks bad. What I did have to do was, and it wasn't really even too much, and I did talk about this in the last video as well, I had to kind of figure out the bracketry. So the bracket lines up perfectly with the transmission, but I had to space it out. And it's going to be really hard to see, but I'm going to try to show you. You can kind of see right there on the bottom. I got some spacers right here, metal chrome spacers. I bought a 1-inch and a 1/4 inch because I didn't know how long I was going to need it to be. So I initially installed this with 1 and 1/4 together. And it worked, but it actually brought the exhaust out really far. And that caused some other problems down the line. I'll explain in a minute. I ended up switching it up where I just used a 1-inch on the back. And of course my bolts were too long, so what I did is I just put that 1/4 inch spacer on the outside to kind of take some slack out of the bolt. It actually works great because this makes it easier for me to take that bracket on and off. So that lined up fine. What doesn't line up fine is this is a 2-bolt bracket. One bolt's supposed to go in the exhaust here and one's supposed to go in the exhaust here. And as you can see, this is where the difference between the later model Dyna and the FXR is happening. This bracket is sitting in towards the engine more than it would on a Dyna. Obviously the Dyna, the engine's a little longer or something, I'm not sure. But one of the bolt holes actually lines up. The back bolt hole on the bracket lines up with the inner bolt hole on the exhaust. And so for right now, and I'll probably, fix this up later, for right now I'm just running one mounting bolt into here. It's super tight, it's super sturdy. There's probably a million people out there that are going to be all upset about the fact that I only got one bolt holding it together. I don't find it a problem. It's just, if you pull on the exhaust and the entire bike shakes, it's tight. What I intend to do at some point is create an additional piece to go on top of this bracket that extends it back and allows me to put a bolt through there as well and hold it all nicely down to that mounting bracket. But for now, it works. It works fine, and it's very solid. This was the biggest problem with using this exhaust. It is right here. So, the brake pedal on the FXR is a little bit farther forward. I think the controls in general are a little farther forward than they are on a Dyna. So, the previous owner had the brake pedal sitting almost flat with the foot peg. So the brake pedal would have been sitting right here. And what was happening is when I pushed the brake, it was just bumping right into the exhaust. So I did two things. And again, I'm going to piss a bunch of purists off, but I used a cutter and grinder to cut a little bit of the front of the brake pedal off. I'm trying to get it to focus. Oh my god. When I see old people on YouTube trying to take videos and they can't get their stuff to focus and I'm like yelling at them, I have empathy now. I don't know why it's so difficult as soon as you record. Anyway, I did take a little bit of material off the front of this brake pedal, as you can see, especially in this area right here. I know, don't ruin the parts, oh my god. It's fine, there's a million of these brake pedals on the internet, and there's even companies that make reproductions now. So I did that at first. That worked pretty well. I was able to at least apply the brake without it hitting the pipe. But it didn't really work well enough. So my second thought was to pull the brake pedal up. This brake pedal was sitting way too far down to begin with. So if you're familiar with these, there's a little brake rod, like right here. And this brake rod is adjustable, and it allows you to move the pedal up and down so much to adjust it. Well, the previous owner, the one who I assume made the brake pedal completely flat, cut that rod, cut more than half of the thread off of it. So the rod was only like that long. So I could get almost no adjustment out of it. Not only did he cut the rod down, but he took the set nut off of it. There's a nut that you crank down to make sure that the whole thing doesn't move around. So I couldn't lift this pedal up like this. The most I could lift it was like this much, and then it was still hitting. So I had to order a new brake rod with the adjustment nut. And what that allowed me to do is bring the pedal up like this, which is actually correct. The problem with having the pedal level like this is it might feel good because your foot and your toes are flat while you're riding. But when you push the brake down, there's a bunch of throw in this brake pedal. Like there's a good inch or two of throw. So when your brake pedal's level like this, what ends up happening is it comes down like this. And what it feels like is it feels like your foot's tipping down like a sport bike. So I didn't like that anyway, that's how it was set up. So this actually turned out okay. So by raising the pedal, cutting a little bit of material off of it, I can bring this pedal way down and it doesn't get anywhere near touching it. I can lock the back brake up. I mean, I can stand on this thing and it doesn't hit. So everything's good there. Working just fine. And you can barely tell that I took material off this. You'd really have to be looking close. Some people would say that the FXR guys notice everything. Well, I don't really care about the FXR guys. I'm not a purist and I'm not a snob. And if it works and it looks okay, it's happy with me. I'm just glad the bike's back together and I have an FXR. So I feel privileged at all to be able to afford one of these. What else did I do? Let me think here. I think that was pretty much it. And now I just put everything back together. Oh, I put the backrest brackets on. Because of my goofy bag system, these bags not quite fitting on an FXR and sticking out past the seat, that also means that the brackets are underneath the back strap of these bags, or the throwover. So in order to make them fit, I actually had to cut some little slices in the bags to allow the brackets to pop up through. It's kind of rigged, but, you know, I don't really care. You can't really see it. If you look real closely, you'd notice it. When you have the actual backrest on there, you really can't see anything. So I don't care. That works. I don't have the bar on right now because I'm not driving with a passenger, so I don't need it. Obviously, what you're all probably wondering is, does the bike work? Yes, it starts and it runs, and I will show a video of that a little bit later. I'm getting ready to leave for a little while. So when I come back out in a bit, I will start the bike up for you and show you what it sounds like and what it runs like. It's incredible. I can't really fathom the power difference just by adding the cam and the 9-to-1 pistons and this exhaust and the intake. I mean, I guess that's kind of a lot. This is probably considered like a stage 2 build, and it is a massive difference. I can only imagine if I've got high flow heads or got those heads ported, what it would be like. I mean, it rips. The low-end torque is just about like what it was before, like around the 2,000 to 3,000 RPM range. There's not a huge improvement. I shouldn't say that. There is an improvement, and I know that because I've accidentally popped a couple of little wheelies taking off from stoplights. But where you really feel it is about 3,200 RPM up to red line. It is just insane. I mean, it just pulls like nothing else. So I don't know how much horsepower I have or torque at this moment. I gotta imagine it's probably 60s to 70s. You know, maybe someday I'll get it dynoed. I'd like to actually know. So we'll find out if that ever happens. But it feels really good, and it sounds really good. Any other details here? Video's getting long, sorry. The way that this exhaust works is the head pipes just sort of fit into the collector. You might be able to kind of see it if I get real close, but you'll see a little bit of orange material. There was exhaust leaking out of here, and that's actually a complaint with this exhaust. This is a competition series Arlen Ness exhaust. They don't make it anymore. It was a very expensive exhaust. Obviously, it's stainless steel, but it had issues with leaking. I think it was meant for like drag racing or something, primarily. So there was a little leaking here, and it was, you know, I saw some black soot coming out. And because of that leaking too, I was getting a lot of popping on decel because it's obviously sucking air back in too. So I got some Permatex Ultimate Copper, I think it's called, which is a really high temp Permatex. And I put that inside the collector and kind of squirted it around. I haven't got a chance to come in here and clean it up, and that's why you still see a little bit of it on the outside. I can get in there with a some kind of little blade or toothpick and clean that up. But I just did it, and one night while I was out here, and I haven't got a chance to go and finish that. So, what else? Oh, yeah. So I get it back together. Took my first ride. I took it very easy because the internet's got me all scared about break-in procedure. I'm going to explain this in a second. The problem with a slow break-in procedure is you put all these performance parts on and you can't feel like if your bike improved at all or whatever the case is. So I did some research, and again, I'm sure this is going to be a hot topic, but I did some research on YouTube and the internet about how necessary is it to do a slow, easy break-in, and it seems that that's kind of an old school carryover from the days of old. I found a really good video by, I don't know who the YouTuber is, it's the mechanic that works for one of the big motorcycle and ATV shops. I cannot think of their name right now. I think his name is Ari, but he was on a channel previously. Not the same one he's on now. I know none of this makes any sense. I'm sorry. If I find it, I'll try to put a little title on the screen to tell you what the YouTube channel is. But anyway, he did a test where he built 2 engines for like a small street bike. And built 2 brand new engines with the same components, same tolerances, did everything identical. He broke one in slow, and he broke one in hard, like where he's literally getting on it, redlining it all the time. And they took the engines back apart, and there was no significant difference in the wear between them at all. Oops, I pulled a spark plug out to look at my mixture, and forgot to put the wire back on. So I have opted not to do a slow break-in. I mean, I'm not like goosing it constantly or like trying to be reckless, but I am driving it like I would drive it, and it's been fine. There's no major like noises or anything weird that I should be worried about. I'm glad I drove it easy because I wanted to get everything, you know, at least a good 30 miles to sort of wear it and make sure I didn't hear any funny sounds, and there's not. It sounds real good. I mean, there's a little bit of extra lifter noise now with that cam, I imagine. You know, it's not there's necessarily a ton more lift, but the duration's a little bit more, so it just sounds different. But nothing's wrong. I never did pull that lifter out, by the way, the one that was sticking. I decided not to. It wasn't sticking enough, and I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I didn't waste my time, because by the time I got it back together and actually turned the bike on, it was no issue whatsoever. So, yeah. Also, before I get to the tape on the gas tank, I routed my bottom vent up here, and I just have a little valve cover style air cleaner deal. It's actually a K&N, not that that matters, but I just have it sort of zip tied up there behind the air cleaner and out of the way, so you can't really see it from the front. I do not believe this may just be DK Customs propaganda, but I do believe what they're saying. I don't like running the exhaust or the breather gas into the air cleaner, because I completely understand what they're saying. There's some oil mist and air that's getting sucked back into your engine, and it's just going to end up on top of your pistons at some point. So since I put brand new pistons and rings in, I didn't want to run that back into the air cleaner. Not that this has a fitting for it anyway, but so I'm running that externally. The only downside to that is, in classic Evo fashion, this bike does puke out of the vent a little bit. It's not extreme, and so I've noticed a little bit of oil down here on the tappet blocks that, if you look up, you can see that this little breather filter I have is kind of wet. So there's still a little bit of sumping going on, which is actually an oil filter or an oil pump problem. So it's not enough for me to care about at the moment. If it drips a little oil or whatever, I'm just going to be okay with it. And speaking of dripping oil, so all my leaks up on top, other than the one I already talked about, all the leaks up on top seem to be gone. I do have to try to tighten this rocker cover down a little bit more in the back, the one that you can like not get to, because I do see a little bit of seepage over there too. Unfortunately, to do that, I have to actually pull the stinking front motor mount again, because I can't get the wrench in there. Even the flat wrench, that special wrench I bought, I can't fit it in there at all. It's ridiculous. So, but that is what it is. So I do have to tighten it down, and I'm going to replace the washers and stuff altogether anyway, so I'm just waiting. It's not enough oil leak. So, but the big oil leaks I had, like in the rockers, rocker boxes, those are gone. What I have sprouted is an oil leak somewhere in there. Not a bad one. And you can see I put some cardboard down. In fact, it's dry right now, but you can see a couple little spots on the driveway, like here and here. Those are some, this is not oil, that's glue someone stole on the ground, but there is a little tiny bit of oil leaking onto the pavement now, and I have traced it down to this general area right here. There's a couple of things it could be. It could be the oil from the breather puking, which is right here, falling down here, and dripping down here, and ending up down here. More than likely, that's probably what it is, because what I'm seeing when I'm done riding is I'm seeing some wetness in this area. But as you can see, there's a whole lot of other garbage in that area too. Those are all the lines from the oil pump to and from, and vent lines, and breather lines, and who knows what. These oil lines are original and are very hard like hard plastic. There's no rubber to them anymore. And I do see a lot of wetness in around this specific area of both of these. So I have a feeling that these oil lines are shot, and that's probably where the majority of the leaking is coming from. Unfortunately, you can't get these oil lines anymore, not like the preformed ones like this. I'm sure if you tried hard enough and you called a million dealerships, you could probably find some new old stock or something and it costs $1 million. So I'm in the process of figuring out what I'm going to do to replace these oil lines. I could just use regular 3/8 like transmission hose, but the problem is they won't be formed. So that's going to kind of potentially change how things are routed. The concern there is you don't want an oil line that's pinched. So I'm going to have to do a little research and decide what I'm going to do about that. It's not so much this one in the back, that's the breather hose. That should have no pressure on it, but these three right here, there's a vent and the 2 lines from the pump that are coming back here, and this seems to be where the leak is. What I'm doing a little research on right now is, and this is a lot of work, but some people replace the rubber oil lines with hard lines, like basically like fuel line that you'd use in a car, or brake lines, and then you flare the ends and put different fittings on. I really, really am fascinated with the idea of doing that, because you basically have oil lines once and for all, assuming they don't crack. But that's also a lot of work. So I'm going to think on it a little bit. I might end up going that way and just spend some time like making hard oil lines and getting everything to do it. You can get everything to do it on Amazon, and it's actually really cheap. So we'll see. If anyone has any experience with that, comment. All right, so to this tape. This is actually not as big of a deal as it looks like. Got the bike together, took it for a ride, put gas in it, and gas started leaking out the bottom, like roughly around where these wires are, right here. These are the wires from the sending unit. Actually, these are the power wires. I'm sorry, take that back. Sending unit wires are up top. These are the power wires running to the gas gauge. There's a tube that runs all the way through the tank up to here, where those wires pop out. I'm not going to take this off at the moment. What happens is that the fuel sending unit that sticks down in the tank right here has a cork gasket underneath it, and those cork gaskets wear out, and this one is very old and very worn, so gas will actually leak up over that gasket into this hole, and then it'll leak down that hose that the wires run through, and leak down on the ground. That's what I had happen. Searched on YouTube, and in 5 minutes found a guy that had the resolution. I went to my auto parts store and I got a sheet of cork gasket material, and I just made the gasket and put it all back together, and that's not leaking anymore. Why the tape is on here is because I have my fuel gauge. As you may recall in the other videos, if you looked closely enough, the plastic on the front of the fuel gauge where you look through to actually see your needle, it was all, you couldn't see through it. I imagine what happened because I was leaking is gas fumes got up into the fuel gauge and basically like destroyed the plastic. So I have since pulled the fuel gauge out. It's in the house, so I'm not going to show you right now, but I have it all pulled apart, and the bezel in the back of the gauge, so basically like the black plastic in these, the one that is in the fuel gauge just completely crumbled into little tiny bits and busted. So I contemplated buying a universal fuel gauge or buying one of those Intellitronics ones that you can get from FXR division. And then I realized that I don't need to do any of that because I can 3D print plastic, and I can 3D print clear plastic, which works perfectly for doing lenses and things of that nature. So I have actually designed the back bezel and the lens in 3D, and those are being printed right now. So I'm just going to reprint and basically like restore the fuel gauge, and then I'll be able to put my old one back on there, which did work fine other than you couldn't see through it. So right now I just have this taped up so junk doesn't fall down into that hole. That's about it. That's where I'm at. So it's back together. It's running. No major hiccups, just a couple little things. And I'll try to get a clip here just a couple minutes when I'm ready to take off. I'll try to get a clip of the thing running, starting and running, and I'll start it from cold so you can see what that's like. So you know I'm not cheating and that it actually runs. So I'll be back with that in just a minute. All right, here we are. Cool. This choke knob doesn't stay up all the time, so I might have to adjust that, but make sure I'm neutral. Getting the mixture down.